Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here to tackle the big questions, try and make complex topics a bit clearer.
That's the goal.
And today we're really diving into a text called What Islam Really Is, a simple philosophical view. It looks at some, well, pretty fundamental ideas about faith, about existence itself.
Yeah, it's quite comprehensive.
Think of this as your streamlined guide. We're aiming to get to the core of Islamic concepts as presented in this source.
Exactly. And it's not just, surface level stuff. This text really digs into the why. Why creation? Why follow this path? What happens next? It covers a lot of ground.
And importantly, it seems to base these ideas firmly in the Quran and the Hadith.
That's right, the foundational sources.
So our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to pull out the key insights, maybe find some surprising bits just to give you, our listener, a clearer picture of what Islamic belief is really about, according to this particular view.
Sounds good. Where should we start?
Okay, let's jump right in. The text asks, when did Islam actually begin? And the answer it gives might not be what most people assume.
Right. That's quite interesting. It suggests Islam, as a basic concept, submitting to God didn't just pop up in the 7th century.
No.
The text argues it started right back with the first human, with Adam, peace be upon him.
Wow. Okay, so it sees it as more of a continuous way of life then.
Precisely. A continuous thread. It suggests this fundamental way of life has evolved, or maybe the guidance for it has been presented differently over time.
Tailored to different people, different eras.
Yeah, exactly. Different life management systems, as the text puts it.
Yeah.
Depending on people's understanding, their society, things like that.
So does that mean figures from before Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, people who submitted to God in their time, they could be considered Muslim in that sense?
In that broader sense, yes, according to this view. Anyone who sincerely submitted to the one God, following the guidance they received, would fit that description.
That's a big idea. Which leads naturally to the next question, I suppose.
Which is?
Why follow the Islamic way of life now, as it's understood today, based on the final revelation? What's the reasoning given?
Well, the text links success, like real success in life and the hereafter, directly to following God's commands.
Okay.
It puts forward the idea that, look, life, the universe, everything in it, it's all created by God, and specifically for humanity's benefit, for our use.
So there's a sense of purpose behind it all, centered on us.
Absolutely. And because of that, we're seen as, well, indebted to God for our very existence, for everything we have.
Right, a debt of gratitude.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the text actually points to the Quran to back this up. Surah Ali Imran, verses 14 and 15.
What do they say?
They talk about the things people desire in this world, family, wealth, all those things. But then they contrast it with something much better.
Which is?
Paradise. The reward for those who are mindful of God, who fear him and follow his way. It puts worldly life in perspective.
Okay, that paints a clear picture of the motivation. Now, shifting gears slightly, what about the reason for creation itself? Why did God create humanity at all, according to this text?
The text offers a couple of points. First, simply that creating is part of God's nature, one of his attributes. He is a creator.
Okay, that makes sense.
But more specifically, it states a primary purpose for creating both humans and another creation called jinn.
We'll get to them later, right?
Yes, we will.
Yeah.
The purpose for both is the worship of God. That's laid out clearly in the Quran, Surah Ad-Dariyat, Ayah 56.
Worship as the main goal. That's very direct.
It is. And it adds that humans are actually honored creations. It references Surah Al-Isra, Ayah 70, which talks about God honoring the children of Adam and favoring them.
So a special status within creation.
Definitely. It highlights an inherent value placed on human life.
Given all that, let's define terms more clearly for today. Who is considered a Muslim now? We talked about the historical sense, but what about present day?
Right. So in today's context, the text defines a Muslim as someone who consciously, willingly submits to God's will. Specifically, the will revealed through Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Following the Islamic way of life we discussed.
Exactly. Those who follow that path are called Muslims. And interestingly, it brings up a hadith, a saying of the Prophet, suggesting everyone is actually born in a state of submission, like a natural inclination.
An innate spirituality.
Kind of, yeah. But then the hadith says their parents or society might lead them onto different paths later.
That's fascinating. So what defines the true Islam that people are submitting to? Where does one find that?
Good question. The text is clear. It's defined by the Quran, which is believed to be God's literal word,
Okay.
and by the life example of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That includes his teachings, his actions, the Hadith and Sunnah, also what his companions agreed upon. It's a whole package.
A comprehensive system. Which brings us to a really critical point, proof. What evidence does the text offer that Islam is the truth?
This is a major point in the text. It really centers on the Quran itself.
How so?
It basically issues a challenge. It says, if anyone can prove the Quran is false, using solid, irrefutable logic.
Logic, not just, say, current scientific theories that might change.
Exactly. The text specifies logic that isn't dependent on shifting science. If someone could logically disprove the Quran, then the text implies Islam's foundation would crumble.
So the Quran itself is presented as the primary proof, through its inability to be logically falsified.
Yes, and also through its preservation. That's the other key aspect raised.
Preservation, how?
The text really stresses that the Quran has been kept completely intact, word for word, from the time it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
How is that even possible over centuries?
Well, it highlights the role of the Prophet's companions. Huge numbers of them memorized the entire book, and that tradition of memorization called hifz continues even today.
Wow. So oral tradition played a massive role.
A massive role, alongside the written text. It also points to the consistency between the earliest written versions, like the Uthmanic script.
A standardized version from early on.
Yes, compiled very early. And it says that script matches the Qurans we have today. It mentions ancient manuscripts, like the ones found in Birmingham or Samarkand, as physical evidence supporting this consistency.
Okay, so the argument is the Quran is a challenge that hasn't been logically refuted, and it's been perfectly preserved. That's the core evidence presented.
That's the essence of it, yeah.
Let's talk about the messengers, the prophets. Where do they fit into this picture?
They're central to how God communicates his guidance. The text identifies Adam, peace be upon him, as the first prophet.
Right, we mentioned him earlier.
And it states clearly that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last prophet, the final one.
He's called the seal of the prophets, isn't he?
Exactly, meaning no more prophets will come after him. The text is very firm that anyone claiming prophethood after Muhammad, peace be upon him, is considered false within this framework.
That's a definitive statement. What qualities are prophets believed to have?
They're seen as the best of humanity in character. Sinless, completely trustworthy, noble, basically role models.
And the Quran itself was revealed to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him.
Yes, over a period of about 23 years. Not all at once.
23 years. Why so long?
The text suggests this gradual revelation reflects its depth and importance. It allowed guidance to come down, addressing specific situations and needs as they arose, building the community's understanding step by step.
I see. It wasn't just a book dropped from the sky.
No. And the text argues that understanding it, really living it, required the prophet's explanation and example.
During his time, sure, but what about now?
That guidance, his explanation and example, is preserved in the Hadith. That's why it's considered essential alongside the Quran.
Okay, perfect transition. Let's talk more about Hadith and Sunnah. What exactly are they?
So, Hadith are the records, the narrations, of what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, what he did, and even things he tacitly approved of.
Like little reports.
Kind of, yeah. And the Sunnah is the broader concept of his overall practice, his way of life, derived from these Hadith. It's the practical example.
And the text argues these are crucial for understanding the Quran.
Absolutely. It even points to verses in the Quran itself that command believers to follow the Prophet. Surah An-Nahl, verse 44, for instance, or Surah An-Nisa, verse 113.
So the Quran itself points to the need for the Prophet's guidance.
Precisely. And back in the Prophet's time, people memorized these Hadith, just like the Quran.
But how did they make sure they were accurate? People misremember things.
That's a really important point. The text explains that early Islamic scholars developed very rigorous methods to check the authenticity of Hadith.
Like what?
They scrutinized the chain of narrators who heard it from whom, going all the way back. They assessed the reliability and memory of each person in the chain. It was quite scientific in a way.
A system to filter out mistakes or fabrications.
Exactly, to ensure accuracy. It mentions the 6 major collections of Hadith that are considered the most reliable after the Quran.
So these aren't just random stories.
Not at all. And there are other compilations too, like Riyadh as-Salihin, which gathers key Hadith for everyday life, beliefs, laws, manners, worship. They explain the Quran and fill in the practical details.
Okay, that clarifies the relationship between Quran, Hadith, and Sunnah. Now, the text also mentions other beings, angels, for instance, Fareshta.
Yes, angels. The text confirms they are creations of God, separate from humans and jinn.
What are they like?
Well, that's the thing. We're told some things about them, certain roles they play, but the text emphasizes that their true nature, why God created them exactly. Much of that is beyond our knowledge. It points to the limits of human understanding about the unseen.
Acknowledging the mystery? What about the jinn? That's a concept many people find intriguing or maybe even confusing.
Right. Jinn are presented as another distinct creation of God. Importantly, like humans, they have free will.
Free will. So they can choose between good and evil.
Yes, and they will be judged for their choices, just like humans. The text notes they were created before us and from a different substance, smokeless fire, whereas humans are from earth or clay.
Smokeless fire. That's specific. Does the text address common ideas about them, like feeling their presence?
It does, actually. It cautions against assuming, say, a hot spot in a room means jinn are there.
Okay.
It suggests they're generally invisible to us in their natural state
Yeah.
and not detectable by our current technology. However, it also states they can change their form.
Change form, like shape-shifting.
Yes, appear as humans or animals. That's a key attribute mentioned. And apparently they have their own societies, languages, families.
A parallel existence, almost.
In a way. The text also brings up a concept called sar, suggesting jinn can sometimes reside in a human body.
Like a possession. Or more like...
It uses the analogy of a parasite, which sounds quite unpleasant.
Definitely. Does it talk about interacting with them?
It does, but mainly in a negative context. It warns about people, like sorcerers, trying to communicate with jinn for harmful reasons.
Like causing trouble between people.
Exactly. It describes a method involving personal items to help the jinn target someone and whisper negative things, but it strongly warns against any of this, emphasizing that Satan, or Iblis, who is one of the jinn,
Right, the famous one.
is a clear enemy to humans. It references Quranic verses from Surah Yasin about not following Satan. So the message is, be aware they exist, but don't seek them out, especially for harmful ends.
A clear warning. Okay, let's shift focus back to humanity. We touched on being honored, created from clay, purpose being worship. What else does the text say about us?
It really emphasizes that honored status, referencing Surah Al-Isra, verse 70 again, how God has provided for humans and preferred them over many other creations.
Okay.
It also details the creation of Adam, peace be upon him, a bit more, how God told the angels his plan.
That's in Surah Al-Baqarah, right?
Verse 30, yes. And how God breathed the soul into Adam, peace be upon him, and importantly, taught him the names of all things.
The names, what does that signify?
It's generally understood to mean he gave Adam, and therefore humanity, knowledge, intellect, the capacity to understand and categorize the world. A unique gift.
A foundation for human knowledge and civilization, perhaps.
You can see it that way.
Now, you mentioned the text addresses evolution earlier. Can you expand on its perspective?
Sure. It directly counters the idea that humans evolved linearly from other animal species.
So no common ancestor in that sense.
Not according to this text. It proposes that God created humans directly, with a specific form suited for Earth. Any similarities we see between species, bones, DNA, etc., it attributes to a common designer, not common descent.
The creationist perspective, then?
Yes, emphasizing intelligent design.
What about human diversity? Male and female.
It affirms God created humans, male and female, citing Surah An-Nisa, verse 1. It also acknowledges people who might be born intersex, and the term used is kunza.
How does it view that?
It seems to view it as a biological variation, much like any other congenital condition. The core message remains that the purpose of life obeying God applies to everyone, regardless of such variations.
Understood. Now, this is a huge question. Free will. How free are we, really, according to this viewpoint?
It presents a balanced view. It says, yes, we absolutely have free will in crucial areas, choosing belief or disbelief, choosing good actions over bad ones. That's where our accountability lies.
But not in everything.
No. It points out loads of things we don't control. Our heartbeat, breathing, digestion. Our basic bodily functions run automatically.
The autonomic nervous system, yeah.
Right. And even the things we choose to do, like moving an arm, require the ability, the capacity that God gave us, the signals from the brain, the muscles working. It all depends on his creation.
So it's like we have freedom within a framework that God established.
That's a good way to put it. Agency, but within divine limits and enablement.
Which connects directly to reward and sin, sawab, and guna. How does that work?
Simple concept. Our actions get recorded. Good deeds, done sincerely for God and following his rules, earn rewards, sawab.
Is it like earning points?
The text suggests is more like a natural consequence. Do good for God's sake, reward follows. But crucially, getting into paradise isn't just about racking up points. It's ultimately through God's mercy. The rewards are more like evidence, proof that you tried, that you lived a life of faith and good deeds.
I see. And sins, Guna.
Those come from disobeying God's commands, going against the guidance. The text gives examples, but the basic idea is choosing wrongly when you had the capacity to choose rightly.
Okay, actions have consequences, recorded for later. What happens immediately after death? You mentioned the grave, Cobb.
Yes, death is certain, the text states. The Cobb is that state after death. The body goes into the earth, usually.
But the soul?
The soul and body enter a different state of existence. The reality of what the deceased experiences, only God truly knows. But the text indicates the soul enters a realm called Barzakh.
Barzakh, like an intermediary stage.
Exactly. Between death and the final day of judgment. In this Barzakh state, the soul can experience either comfort or torment, reflecting their life. And somehow this experience relates to the body too, wherever it may be.
Even if the body is, say, cremated or lost at sea.
The connection is spiritual, not necessarily physical in the way we understand it. The grave, or kabra, is essentially this waiting period, this Barzakh state, until resurrection. The text really urges remembering death to prepare for this.
It's like a waiting room before the final verdict.
A good analogy.
And what happens when that waiting is over? The day of judgment? Kiyama?
Right. The text describes a trumpet blast. All creation perishes. Then another blast, and everyone is resurrected, brought back to life.
Everyone.
Everyone. Humans, jinn. Surah Az-Zumar, verse 68, talks about this. And the earth itself changes dramatically, becomes like a flat plane.
Wow. And people are resurrected. How?
In a state that reflects their deeds. And the questioning that might happen in the grave Barzakh is like a prelude to this main event.
The final accounting, which leads to the day of reckoning, Yom al-Hisab.
Yes. The day everyone answers for everything. The books recording our deeds are presented.
Everything. Even things we didn't mean to do. Or just saw.
The text suggests a very thorough accounting. It mentions even what the eyes have seen. But a key principle from Surah Al-Isra, verse 15, is that no one carries another person's burden. Your actions are your own.
Personal responsibility, starkly put.
Very much so. It even includes a scene from Surah Ibrahim, verse 22, where Satan basically says to those he misled, hey, I just invited you, you chose to follow, don't blame me.
Oof. No escaping responsibility then.
Not at all.
And for those whose reckoning doesn't go well, what's the outcome?
The text describes hellfire, Jahannam, the place of punishment for those who rejected God and did evil.
Is it uniform?
No, it mentions different levels, intense suffering. Surah An-Naba, verses 21 to 30, gives some descriptions. And for those who disbelieved, it states, referencing Surah Al-Asab, verse 65, that they will remain there eternally.
Eternally. That's heavy.
It is. It depicts various forms of torment. It's presented as the ultimate consequence of rejecting God's mercy and guidance.
This has been, well, quite a journey through these core ideas. From the very beginning of Islam as seen by this text, through creation, purpose, prophets, the unseen, free will, accountability, and the afterlife.
It really covers the fundamentals as presented in what Islam really is.
We set out to get a clearer understanding, and this text definitely provides a very specific, interconnected philosophical framework.
It does. It offers answers based on the Quran and Hadith to some of life's biggest questions from an Islamic perspective.
And hopefully for you listening, this deep dive has given you some valuable insights into those foundational beliefs.
Yeah, highlighting that internal logic and structure.
So, reflecting on all this, especially that interplay we discussed between our own choices, our free will, and this larger divine plan or order, it does make you think, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
Considering these ideas about purpose, accountability, and mercy, maybe a question to ponder for yourself is, what does living a life of purpose and responsibility truly mean to you in light of the big questions we've touched on today? Something to reflect on.
Definitely food for thought.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.